Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech Podcast. This is episode 180. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. In this week's episode, I want to start taking a look at Ubuntu 2004, and a lot of videos out there are doing full reviews of Ubuntu. It gets done every single time that Ubuntu releases, and I thought I would do something a little different than what most people are doing. I'm sure somebody has done this, but I'm going to take a step sort of backwards and talk to you about the things that you should or should not do after you install Ubuntu 2004. Now, when I say this, what I'm going to get into is a couple of articles that are usually put out by OMG Ubuntu or other websites that usually talk about the best things to do with your new or fresh install of Ubuntu 2004 or any version of Ubuntu when it is released. And before I get into that, if you've never been to my website, check out MrpTechReviews.com. That's where you're going to find all the latest episodes. And you can also go to podnuts.com and check out all the other great shows on the Tech Podcast Network. So today, I want to talk to you about articles that have been released usually alongside of a major Linux distribution release, and usually it's the top 10 or top 25 things to do after you install a Linux distribution. Now, I'm going to talk to you about things that have happened to me in the past. This is no way a criticism of the articles that you are reading, because they do have good information. So these are just my opinions and of what you should and should not do after installing a Linux distribution. So I'm going to go through the kind of list here. This first article is from TechMint, and it's the 25 things to do after installing Ubuntu 2004. And I think there's a lot of great things here. Usually when you see these articles, the first thing that you're going to see is check for updates, make sure your system is up to date. They show you how to do it. And I do encourage that you do check for updates. Now, one thing that I've seen new in Ubuntu 24, and my first thoughts of Ubuntu 2004, by the way, are very impressive. The look and feel of Ubuntu has really improved over the last several long-term releases, and this version of Ubuntu is looking very nice, and I can see that they have finally put some effort into the overall look and feel, finally. One of the things that I saw is the new live patch for the canonical live patch service. And while this is a great feature that will apply certain security updates without having to restart your computer, you do need to have an Ubuntu One account. And I did not necessarily, I understand why that's the case, but I don't necessarily like to opt into those types of features. So it's not something that is absolutely necessary. I'd see it as important, but I don't really like to have to sign in to get security updates. So here's the thing, as I'm doing these, okay, in the past when I was first learning about Linux, and this is the reason I'm doing the video, when I first was learning about installing Linux and really coming from somebody who knew nothing about Linux, the idea was that I would often go to these articles and try to follow every single one of the steps. These steps are not necessarily something that is 100% necessary for a new Linux user to set up in order to have a fully working system. In fact, many times when I would go through these articles in the past, I would do all of these steps one by one all the way to the very end, and usually end up breaking my system. So that's sort of what I'm talking about today. Some of these articles I agree that are very well written, and they mean well, okay? And so far so good. And number 3 in this one is opt out of problem reporting. And I usually opt out of problem reporting just because I enjoy not having my data be sent to anyone. Okay, I do the same thing on Mac. I do the same thing on Windows. It's not a Linux specific thing. I usually opt out of those services, although in some cases it is very important. There are other things that you see that are just fine. Connecting to your accounts, setting up your email client, those are all good things. Setting up your browser. If you don't like Firefox, install something like Chromium or Chrome. Installing VLC media player, all these things are great. Now the media codecs, I often, it's really a matter of preference. If you want those installed, if you want things like sound, you're going to need to install the media codecs. Now that is offered on the install itself, so usually, it's all taken care of by that point in time. Here's where we start to get a little bit down the road that concerns me sometimes. Okay, oftentimes out of the box experience in Linux is quite limited, and developers have developed tweak tools to give more functionality. Now, there's nothing wrong with these tweak tools per se, but if you were to go in and install GNOME tweaks on Ubuntu, and you were to mess with all of the settings in GNOME tweaks, chances are you're probably going to do some damage to your system at some point in time. If you go through and change one or two things, or very few changes, then you're probably going to be much better off. The same thing goes for GNOME extensions. If you have a few favorite extensions for GNOME to give more features, you're going to be okay. But oftentimes those extensions will break, or an update will change those, and either you'll have to go fix that, or it hoses your system. So these are things that a new Linux user will probably not know very much about. And if they're expecting these things to work 100% of the time, then you might get into some trouble. So just be careful with GNOME tweaks and GNOME extensions, because while they're great to do, they're not something that is 100% flawless. So you may run into problems eventually. Again, we go back on the safe side. It talks about setting up default applications. Nothing wrong with that. Configuring keyboard shortcuts. Nothing wrong with that. And experimenting with some of the features like night mode, which, by the way, if you're somebody like me who is now working on a computer more than ever, being at home, this is something that I probably am going to turn on even during the daytime, because my eyes have just been freaking out looking at computer screens all day long, and now with having to teach online all day long. So most of these things are okay, and you get into some things that I think are not needed. For instance, number 17 on this list, install Wine for running Windows apps. Now, I can tell you that Wine is a great application, and there are some uses for Wine, but in my experience, any piece of Windows software that I needed to get up and running, I could not get it to work in Wine. I know Wine has come a long way. I know Wine is a great resource for a lot of people. In my experience, I have never once in 10 years of using Linux have I been able to get Wine to run a Windows application. It talks about installing Steam if you're a gamer. Nothing wrong with that. Installing proprietary graphics drivers, great. That's good stuff. So these articles, they're a mix of things that you should do and things you'd be very careful with doing. Laptop power savings tools, laptop mode tools, and also TLP, which is a great resource. Those are great things to install. And the idea, having a backup system, installing time shift, all of these things are really great. But then all of a sudden, these articles start talking about installing things like Java, which I don't think is needed for the most part. And number 25, absolutely not. Says try different desktop environments. If you are a new Linux user and you don't know what this means, you can install other desktop environments, make it look and feel different. that's okay. But the problem is as your new user, you're going to want to go install a whole lot of different desktop environments. And with that, you're going to pull in all sorts of dependencies from those desktop environments. And if you have one or two installed, you're probably going to be okay. But the more that you install, you're going to start finding problems crop up that you didn't expect, because you have conflicting dependencies, you have conflicting software, and your system's going to get bogged down. And yes, you can try the different desktop environments, but you also have to understand that what it's going to do to your system, the more desktop environments that you install. You can uninstall them, but in past experience, I believe you're going to just ultimately cause more problems than you expect. So I would be careful installing different desktop environments. The reason why I say that is not to dissuade anybody from going and testing these environments. By all means, if you have an old secondary laptop or computer, blow your system away and learn and learn by making mistakes, and you'll quickly find that these adding up desktop environment are going to cause nothing but problems for you in the long run. Now, how many is it going to be? It's different depending on your system, and I don't really have a recommendation. But if you're just distro hopping, if you're trying different Linux distributions, there's nothing wrong with checking out a desktop environment. But if you want a stable system, especially like on an LTS like Ubuntu 2004 is, the long-term support, you want that system to last, and you want that system to be up and running without any issues. Okay. And if you are reading these articles for the first time, you're going to have some ideas of that you should do all of this stuff to have your system up and running properly. And that's not the case. So Ubuntu 2004 looks great. I haven't spent a whole lot of time using it, honestly, and I will talk about that in a little bit. Here's some more things. This is from OMG Ubuntu. They usually post 10 things to do after installing Ubuntu 2004 LTS, and they do this every time Ubuntu comes out. And what I liked about this is that it also says in the title, and 4 things you shouldn't do after installing the OBS or Ubuntu 2004. So they kept it pretty safe in this article, and they talk about the first thing is see what's new. Obviously, that's what everybody's going to do when they install Ubuntu. They want to see what's new. I do like the dark mode in Ubuntu 24, and they mentioned experimenting with dark mode. I tend to like things darker on my screen. It just saves my eyes a little bit. And again, we go really quickly into GNOME tweaks, and I cautioned you before on that. They recommend some software like a powerful preview tool, which is fine. And they talk about enabling minimize on click, which I think is a feature that is useful, but I don't think everybody needs to do that as soon as they install Ubuntu. And they talk about enabling to show the battery percentage icon in the top right of the screen. I don't think everybody needs to do that. I think it's a neat feature that is something that I use, and on the upper right of my corner of my screen, I am showing the battery percentage. But I think if somebody wanted that, they could look into that a little bit more. So it's not something that everybody should do. They also show you how to change the direction of the touchpad scrolling, which for me, it's no matter which computer I'm on, it's always backwards from what I like, which is good. And they also recommend the live patch, and we talked about that earlier. But this one kind of caught me off guard, and I'm not really sure why they would put this on here. But turn on automatic trash deletion. Sometimes it's nice to have that extra security of being able to go in your recycle bin and restore something that you accidentally deleted. I'm not sure why you would want automatic trash emptying. And I see what they're doing here. They're telling you to set it at a certain interval, but I like to actually go in and when I want to delete things permanently, I go in and do it myself. This doesn't seem like it's something that I would recommend a new user to do. And then it just very casually talks about going into the software center and downloading some really great software. It recommends a lot of great software that some of which I use, some of which I don't use. Now, the next thing is the 4 things you shouldn't do, okay? And I think they're right on with this. Don't add a million PPAs. That's the number one way that you're going to break your system. Adding those archives from other software developers. And the more you do that, the more likely it is to break your system. They say don't uninstall the default desktop environment. And I think that is a great point too. If you're trying out all sorts of desktop environments, and if you have 1 or 2 others that are installed and you like them more, don't uninstall the default. I think that's very good. They also caution people not to run terminal commands from the internet unless you know exactly what those commands mean. So never just copy and paste a command from the internet into the command line. You never know what that's going to do. Do your research. Make sure you know exactly what is happening on your system. And so I do applaud them for bringing up some things that you should and shouldn't do. But I really wanted to talk today about just being careful with these articles, whether it's the top 25 things or the top 10 things that you do after installing a Linux distribution, because you don't necessarily need all of those things installed. And really do your research and see which ones that you could spare without or come back to at a later time. Because if you go through and try to install all of these things all at once and you don't know exactly what they're going to do for you, you're just going to run into problems. And what I would recommend is always move slowly when you're trying out a new Linux distribution for the first time, if you're a new Linux user, and don't just install a bunch of junk onto your computer, because you're ultimately going, if you do that on any computer, you're going to have issues. And really pay attention to what's on your system. Ubuntu can be a very very fast performing operating system compared to Windows, and it can, in many cases, it can be much faster. And we all enjoy the convenience of that. We enjoy the security of Linux, and the fact that out of the box, most things work on most computers. And you're going to have issues that crop up. The more things that you that bog down your system, clog up things, you're really just going to get yourself in a bad situation, and you're going to end up having to reinstall. And most Linux users, if they're experimenting, they're going to reinstall their operating system every so often anyway. But if you're somebody who wants a stable desktop environment, desktop computing experience, you don't need to go through every single one of these things and install them. So that was sort of the moral of the story. And this week, I am also looking forward to the release of Pop! OS 2004. Now, Pop! OS is the operating system put out by System 76. It is a spin of Ubuntu. And if you haven't read up on Pop! OS, I would suggest doing that, because Pop! OS has some really neat features that are coming out with Ubuntu, or with Pop! OS 2004. And I'm going to talk about them next time after I get a chance to work with them. And Pop! OS is being released on April 30th, so that's tomorrow from when I'm recording this. So I may put out another episode relatively soon after this one, just because I want to spend a little bit of time with Pop! OS 2004 before I have another show, which will be in the next couple of days. For those of you who don't know, this show is produced on Pop! OS. This is on a System 76 Gazelle laptop, and when I purchased this laptop, I was expecting to either move to Ubuntu, or I was expecting to go back to Arch. I was using Antergos for a long time, spent years on Arch Linux, and that's where I liked being. I enjoyed the bleeding edge of the software. And however, when I purchased this laptop, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give Pop! OS a try and see what System 76 is all about. And Pop! OS has stayed on my computer 2 years now after purchasing this laptop, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a great OS. It's stable, and with things like TimeShift, which is the backup app. In the past, if I have done something stupid that I wasn't thinking about doing, and I sort of, hosed my system or whatever, I just pop in a Linux Live USB drive, boot up into the live environment, and then install TimeShift, and I can go back to my restore point, and then my system's back up and running. So if you haven't tried out TimeShift yet, I would seriously recommend that. That is the most important thing that I think should be on any Linux distribution is TimeShift. It is just an amazing backup tool. So I'm looking forward to Pop! OS. I'm looking forward to 2004. I had been on 1804 for almost 2 years, and that is very rare for me because I usually skip around quite a bit. And I just recently upgraded to 19.10 so that I could upgrade to 2004. I could have gone from 1804 to 2004, but I was getting a little antsy for the new OS, so I upgraded to 1910 just to have something to do until 2004 came out. So I'm looking forward to Pop! OS, and I will give you an update on that when the time comes, and that should be tomorrow. So looking forward to that. I hope everybody is doing well. These last few weeks have been pretty challenging for everyone, and I hope everybody the best out there. I hope you're all staying safe, and thanks so much for listening. We will see you next time.